Hello ratbags, it's Jade. Welcome to a Biomutant review. I often only do reviews on games that are so bad I have to warn people about them, or some games that I just absolutely adore and I want to tell the world. Middling games I kind of ignore. Biomutant isn't a middling game, but definitely it is leaning into the Netflix era of gaming. Games that you'll just play just to chill, mess around with. You'll know there's going to be some great moments in that you're going to talk about, but you'll also know there's a bit of filler there. And so despite some shortcomings, you're still invested enough that you want to see the ending of that season and just get the full experience. So yeah, here is my review. Like I said, I don't often do these. I'm not a professional reviewer, more about guides, tutorials and news. But I felt like Biomutant deserved a proper review from me. Agree, disagree, leave it in the comments section and let's go. Biomutant is a post-apocalyptic kung fu tale action RPG game. You'll be exploring an 8x8 kilometer map, various different factions that you'll speak to, NPCs, side quests, as well as huge boss fights as you try and rescue or condemn a tree of life, which pretty much is the power base for the planet. You will encounter other side stuff that you need to do, either uniting the tribes or destroying them, and the world eaters are these big creatures that are tied to the Tree of Life's fate. And that is pretty much the synopsis of the game. It's obviously single player and you will just be running around a pretty standard various fare of open world activities. It's got some great RPG elements to it though, and the combat in it is really cool. I've played it on PC with a fairly decent system and I was hoping to play it on console, but my actual collector's edition that I ordered ended up being like way delayed by Amazon. Boo! I have seen obviously the videos and I've reported on them showing gameplay on base Xbox and PlayStation and it looked good. Unedited gameplay looked great. I've not heard too many complaints about issues or problems affecting people. The developers have been pretty upfront, showing lots of gameplay early on and just giving us info about what to expect. It has just been great. I've not had any technical issues. There's not been any problems. Maybe one little bug or glitch with a mech suit, but it hasn't really hindered me playing the game. I've enjoyed my time looking at the gorgeous views, the scenery, the creatures, the colours. I really love this art style. I really dig it. The story of Biomutant is a little bit lacking. You start off as a creature and you've kind of forgotten about some certain things. You're reminded via flashbacks of your childhood exactly why you are roaming around the world and why you've got a maybe destiny to fulfill. And yeah, it's okay. The narration that peppers throughout the game is great, and thankfully if you're not into that you can turn it off. There is no real other NPC voices other than just gibberish from the creatures that you'll meet. It isn't actually legible, it's just their own little language and stuff. The only actual English or contextual sort of talking you get is from the narrator, who does do a fantastic job. There wasn't too many moments where I felt like I really wanted to turn it off.
That's a resource totem, a monument left behind by those that picked scrap, trying to keep the area clean.
You will come into some repetition, definitely for sure, but that's the same for every open world game I've ever played. I think a lot of people will be judging quite harshly this game against other brethren like Assassin's Creed, like some of the big ones that I've mentioned, because it is kind of by the numbers the same sort of stuff that you're doing. Running around a huge map, 8x8 kilometers, exploring different biomes, helping out NPCs, doing lots of repetitive missions. This is what a lot of people really want. I've seen a lot of people cry their eyes out because Assassin's Creed isn't Assassin's Creed anymore. It's now just a big Witcher 3 ripoff. But the stats are there, the sales are there. This is what people want from their games now. I don't normally like big bloated open world games. Assassin's Creed Valhalla I thought was great, and in my review of that I did state that I could have easily done without the game being so long. It's just nice to get through some of the story. Biomutant doesn't have as strong a story for sure. There are some interesting moments with it where you're either going towards a dark path to fulfill your destiny or a light path, but it doesn't really alter the world around you until the very end, until basically you see the last cutscene. I haven't come across any ways that the world is shaped or changed by my decisions that I make, and that's a real letdown. I really felt like this game would have benefited from something like that. If you're making constantly sort of renegade decisions, it would have been nice for the world to become more darker and more twisted as you played it. Maybe areas that you visited wouldn't be lush and green anymore, they'd be overcome by desolate sands or desert and stuff like that. Just a change in the actual world to mirror what was going on with you. I also read reports much earlier in game's development that it had a full yearly cycle, and I've yet to come across any of that. I've completed the game, I've defeated the World Eaters, the tribes, I'm well into my New Game Plus, and I've put another 10 hours into a side character just to see what some of the side missions are like early, and I've not come across any of the stuff that was spoken about, like rivers being able to be frozen when you come back to them in the later part of the season and then gain access to another area. That is just non-existent for me so far. Like, there's a day and night cycle and there's rain, but I haven't come across much more than that. And again, that's another letdown in terms of what this game could have been. I mean, if anyone could point out where that stuff is, do let me know. But as I said, in over 30 hours of playing it now, I still haven't come across anything like that. And it's the same sort of story throughout the game. The story is just a little bit overbearing sometimes. It tries to be a little bit with its messages of, you know, your own path is your path. The dark path isn't necessarily the bad path. But then again, every NPC you meet pretty much chastises you for being such a badass. That's what I found anyway when I went down the dark Ura path, where I was literally just doing the most dastardly things I could come up with, and it did feel like the game was trying to tell me, no, maybe you shouldn't be doing that too much, with only slight reprieve now and then that's saying I play the game my way. It does become just a little bit too cliche ridden, and it just feels like there's a message here for sure, but it's really been hammered home. So don't buy this game if you're expecting any kind of big, huge story or loads of cutscenes and stuff. And for many, you'll be going, yes, thank God. I don't want to sit through more bore fests of cutscenes like you see in Assassin's Creed or games like Watch Dogs, etc. You get into it. And I'm actually benefiting from that. I really do prefer this way of doing things. But I would still say the story is pretty weak. You're meant to have an emotional connection to the main villain because of the situation that's happened early on in the game, and it just doesn't really come across. You only meet him a couple of times, he's not stalking you throughout the world, you don't have many interactions, and you don't see enough of the reasoning why or what the problems were between the main villain and possibly your people. I don't want to go too spoilerific right now, so I'm trying to keep it very vague. But yeah, it just felt like it could have been a better payoff, and it could have been nice to see some differences. There are some choices you can make, and just the endings that you get making them choices just aren't big enough. They're just not different enough, and the journey there just isn't reflective enough of them choices that you're making. So although it's an RPG, it's about the stats in terms of your weapons, it's about your character that you're really role-playing, rather than necessarily affecting the world or the game world around you. That sounds mad considering the game is meant to be about either saving the Tree of Life or letting it be consumed by 4 massive World Eaters, but at no point did I ever feel that invested in doing either. When it comes to combat and starting off with them 4 World Eaters, you need to build your way up to defeating these guys with certain missions and items. You think it's going to be pretty epic and big and you're going to have to need all your best gear and best items, but the game does scale quite forgivingly. I would say if you're going to play this game, absolutely whack it on hard if you're experienced at RPGs or action games for sure. The issue with the bosses is that you do a lot of prep, you have to find certain mechanical aids to help you or certain items before you can go and take them on, and then it's rinse and repeat the same sort of thing. You have to distract the boss with something, pull the boss down, or get an opportunity to attack him by doing a quick time event little moment. There's nothing wrong with that, absolutely, and there is some slight variations on it. You've got an underwater boss, you've got a boss that is skimming around in maybe slightly shallow puddles, and then you've got bosses that use big huge electrical whips eventually. And they're huge, they're massive creatures, but I found them all quite easy, and I kind of rushed the last 2 as well, so I was definitely underleveled, but it just wasn't a significant challenge enough. The build up to it ended up being quite long. Each stage you've got to go and talk to an NPC, complete 2 little quests, and then go across pretty much big swathes of the map, trying to find the items that you need, to then come back and then take the boss on. There are lots of other mid-sized bosses, creatures that almost look as big in various different ways, and all sorts of smaller variants, and these are great, these are fantastic moments. The world is not littered with loads of creatures. That could be a problem for some. I was running around the first few hours thinking, man, this game's a bit empty. Like, I'm going from one place to another and I'm just not seeing anything happening in between. But then I started to realise it's about what happens when you get to these places. It isn't meant to be a open world brimming and bustling with activity at every turn. It's about going to a certain spot, utilising your skills in a different way, having that good moment of action and combat or whatever you're doing with your skills, and then getting the sweet loot and rewards. In that way, this game could have probably benefited from being much smaller, maybe even a sort of single player linear experience. I don't think anyone would really have minded that. But the open world nature of it does mean that you do get distracted, and that's going to keep players playing it even longer. There are so many different side quests in the game, and you're going to often come across lots of enemies, different types with different abilities. By the 20th hour, I was starting to see that so many of them still had the same sort of attacks, even if they did look very different, and I was kind of yearning for them to have more special abilities, and you have to really maybe go right to the furthest reaches of the map to find some of the more difficult creatures that will give you more of a challenge. You've got big guys with metal armour on that you can't really shoot at, so you're going to have to use your melee weapons or special psi abilities, or you've got massive big creatures that you've literally just got to be able to dodge and keep them at range. The looks of the creatures is fantastic. It's definitely one of the best things about the game. I love the art style. I've got no problem with it at all, and it really does help that you go around and you come across so many unique creatures. Or even the smaller ones are all out wearing different armour types, using different guns, different weapons. And that's reflective of you, because there are over 2 million combinations of armours and weapons that you could possibly make, and they are absolutely batshit mental in terms of what you can craft and make. When it comes to actually firing stuff though, and some of the animations or the stuff that you do with these, I felt like that could have been ramped up another level. It would have been really cool to see even more wacky weapons that do all sorts of crazy abilities when you use them. Instead, they pretty much still just amount to giving elemental damage. They're still going to just fire off either fire or cryogenic or electricity damage bullets, or be some way that you can hack at them with a pulsating green nunchucker or something. The combat though is overall good though. You do feel that sense that you're using all the tools in your box to take on certain enemies. Like I said, when you do start getting progressing, you come across more and more enemies that are a bit difficult and they need a different approach rather than just hacking or slashing, and so you have to mix it up a little bit more. And yeah, the free flowing nature isn't as big as it has been in like games like Batman Arkham. I did see lots of criticism saying that the developers have said it's like this game or that game. I don't think they've actually directly ever said that. They've said that playtesters have told them that the game feels like that, or that's the feedback that they get, and I can notice that in some elements, but it's not as tight as Batman Arkham. You're not going to be swinging from enemy to enemy every single time. There's a couple moments, depending on what weapon you use, where you can switch between them, and there are lots of nice little combos and stuff, but it isn't as compact and tight as something like Batman Arkham series. I didn't mind that though. It still gave me room to try lots of new abilities. The actual combos I'm not a big fan of sometimes in general in other games, because I just can't remember how to use them all. Some of them are like, my Street Fighter skills are way out of date, and this game does it just about perfectly. The combos aren't too complicated. They're all the same for the same weapons. You just get a different outcome or different animation, and that's really good as well. The amount of moves that you can make with all of the guns, you have to upgrade individually certain guns or weapons with the actual points that you get, attribute points or level up points. These level up points you'll get obviously just by usual bog standard getting XP, or maybe finding some other places that will give you a quick little point here and there. And this is how you're going to customize your character in one of 5 or 6 attributes. Vitality, giving you health and armor. Then you've got like intellect, which gives you like your magic abilities and dodging abilities. Then you've got agility score as well, which gets you to move around a bit more as well. And then loot and luck, etc. You know the deal. If you played an RPG, I shouldn't really sit here explaining it to you. And this is all good. This is all fine. I felt like the starting classes were great. It doesn't affect how you play the game at all. You can switch and mix up your playstyle anytime you want. So if you started off as a tanky character but realised you was having much more fun with ranged weapons, then you could go ahead and start pumping more points and making your character a bit more better in whatever way you want. I've yet to come across a way to properly fully respec though during the game. You can change the body and the shape of your character. You can change the looks apparently, like the fur and the fur colour length and stuff, but I haven't actually come across a way to actually give my points back and choose something different. On top of the upgrade points, you then have the bio points, and these are a big focus of the game. Running around finding bio points or psi points and then upgrading either the tree that goes down that way, which gives you all sorts of crazy, more unique definitely abilities, like using mushrooms to jump around on, or a big floating sort of bubble that can get enemies to be stuck on it as you roll around. They're really cool, that's really interesting, and I kind of wish there was even more of them. I would have liked to have seen another 10 of these abilities added to the game to really just make it a bit mad and a bit crazy. And then on the other flip side, you've got the psi abilities, which are a little bit more elemental, so typical sort of fire or ice bolt or electricity bolt, and then you've got things like telekinesis where you can throw enemies around a little bit as well. They're all great, they're all fun to use, some are obviously better than others, and I've got loads of guides talking about that coming too. And yeah, that is definitely one of the biggest strengths of this game, is utilising everything, using your combat, the gun. I would say focusing on one type of class playthrough isn't as fun for me. I felt like it was just nice mixing it all up all the time, maybe just because I'm a generalist, I don't know, but yeah, it was good. The other part of the game, which is a big focus, is uniting or defeating the rest of the tribes. Pretty much siding with one of them and then going ahead and dominating the map by capturing all sorts of different outposts. This does get really repetitive. They do try and mix it up a little bit. You go to one outpost and you might be able to persuade the leader to give the outpost to you if you've got enough points. Then you go to another one where it's literally a case of you being thrown by a catapult in there to do damage, or other ways that you can go and poison the well or set fire to some moth nests, and that gives you the outpost as well. But given there's like over 15 or maybe 18 or even more outposts that you need to conquer, if you want to get all the tribe weapons, it does become just a bit repetitive. But something that no one is talking about is that 101, how respecting your time. Something I mentioned earlier, I don't like Assassin's Creed sometimes because I just want a nice compact story sometimes. I don't want loads of bloat and filler in between. And a lot of the game, a lot of the time, you're just doing the same actions over and over again before you can hopefully get to the ending and really experience the full story. 101 gives you the option to skip some of the outpost missions. Once you've dominated 2 or 3 of them, it pretty much says to you, do you want the rest to just give in because you're doing it so well? I love this. I think this is great. I've seen a bit of discord saying that this isn't the one, but this is, to me, the devs respecting your time, saying that, you know what, we don't want to bloat this game out for you. We don't want you to have to do boring things that you find repetitive, so you can go ahead, skip it, take part in more side missions, or just get straight to the ending and start a new game plus. This is like the opposite of what Ubisoft do and their games, where they literally will gate stuff off a la Odyssey, or still even Valhalla, really just making you go through just hundreds and hundreds of hours. And that's the other thing to recognise as well. I've seen a lot of criticism about the game already, talking about the fact it's just routine, by the numbers, open world. And as I mentioned, people love this. That's the kind of style that people really want. Like, sure, there's objections to certain franchises maybe deviating from their roots a little bit, but this is why I'm comparing this to a Netflix game. It's got some great moments. It's got one of them vibes that you'll run around just kind of relaxing as you explore the world. It is a bit empty. There are certain things that go against it. The sound sometimes is just a little bit eerily quiet, but the rest of the world just feels great. Like, the environments look amazing. The terrain, the topography, the lushness of everything you come into is fantastic. Literally one of the best, prettiest worlds I've explored in a while. And so it just boils down to what kind of person or gamer you are. Are you someone that really does sit there monging out, playing something over and over again, even though it's repetitive, whether it's a Destiny looter shooter or whether or not it's something more like a roguelike, then I reckon you'll have a bunch of fun in this. If you're someone that really loves a more focused story, like a Mass Effect game, or you really want lots of variety in everything you're doing, then maybe it's not going to be the game for you. But in these times where certain games aren't coming out for a while, I reckon there's a big market for people that just want a kind of homely game to just chill with, not think too deeply about, but still have some fun. And that is the definition of most Netflix series. Some of them are just there to just fill the time in with some great moments, and you're often left wanting to see what improvements they can make if they get a season 2. And I would love to see what they could do with this game now for maybe future DLC or an update or, another sequel, as long as it's not 4 years away. I did complete the game in about 18-17 hours or so. Like I said, I kind of rushed the last stages. I totally just went straight to the last 2 boss eaters without really exploring some of the world and stuff. And I didn't take part in defeating every single tribe. And value is important, especially when you gauge games about their prices, like how much are you getting for the money that you're spending. And I think there's just about enough here. Yes, it can be a 60 or 70 hour game if you're doing every single side quest, you're completing every tribe mission, and you're just taking your time finding all the collectibles or stuff that gives you more points. There really isn't that many collectibles. It's not one of them games where you're going to find a billion flags everywhere. They've kind of just done away with that. There's just little side missions that always give you a bit of a reward, whether it's XP, whether it's a new item. The loot in this game is amazing. The way that you can craft and build and customize, I didn't maybe go over it enough, but it is fantastic. Just being able to build and really make stuff, and I just wish that the actual outcome, the actual way that they fire and you're using these weapons was just even more crazy. But definitely now, I don't want to play another game where I can't craft a massive toothbrush as my weapon or a plunger that's got electrifying properties on it. So absolutely buy this game if you love open world games, you love doing all the side missions, you expect there to be lots and lots of content for your money. I think this game will suit you. Don't buy this game if you're expecting a revolution or some sort of tight focused story. The payoff at the ending just doesn't really match the rest of what I would expect from a game, but then again I can forgive them for that because sometimes it's about the journey and not the ending. It does get repetitive in stages, but no real open world games that I've played recently don't get repetitive, and I would say yeah, it's one of them ones that is a buy for me. I think if they'd maybe had the price not as high, they probably wouldn't be receiving as much criticism as I've seen in the first few days. But for sure, I still think $60 or 50 quid, if you've got the spare cash, then go ahead and buy it. If you're debating whether picking something up like this or Mass Effect, it's all just about what you prefer playing. Are you happy roaming around an open world and doing your own thing, or do you want a more story focused game? I'd be interested to see where they go now with speedrun sort of situation, and it'd be really cool if they can maybe add some of that, lean into it. The developers have been talking about how they've been doing it in their offices and seeing who can get through the game quickest. Integrating some of that into the game would be amazing. Setting off timers, putting a time trial mode in for it. This game could take another life of its own by leaning into maybe stuff like that, or some certainly usual stuff, maybe like a hardcore mode. It has got New Game Plus, of course, and it will make it more difficult. But as I said, I do feel like the scaling was just not hard enough. So please don't play this game on easy. At least just do it on normal. And certainly if you're used to these types of games, whack it on hard straight away. All in all, I think I died maybe only 4 times, 5 times in the game on normal. And maybe 3 of them was because I fell into some water. Some of the greatest moments were using some of the contraptions you get, like the mech suit or the little ski dive thing. But there is either a bug or you just can't use them in certain places that I couldn't use the mech suit anywhere else other than the dead zone. And that frustrated me a little bit, especially as I spent so long getting the actual vehicle. So I kind of feel it must be a bug after reading quite a few comments from people. So hopefully that's fixed for people. And that kind of stuff is great as well. Being able to have lots of different mounts. I kind of wish some of the mounts had more special abilities on them to really differentiate them between them. But they just don't, other than the bat one that kind of glides a little bit more. And other than that, yeah, it's decent. You've got a little companion grasshopper that follows you around, and that can be upgraded when you over a certain time at certain points. And yeah, the side missions will take you all over the map. That's probably the last criticism I would say, is that some of the side missions always had their next objective at like 4,000 miles away, literally across the other side of the map, where you hadn't explored anything. It did feel like a little bit of a cheap shot. Like, it would be nice if some of these side missions were much closer. And don't get me wrong, it's not every side mission is miles away, but a big chunk of them, especially the ones where obviously you're trying to find certain things. The puzzles do become really repetitive. I would say that's probably the one criticism. Maybe if they can add a certain perk or thing that pretty much if you put enough points into it, you don't have to do the puzzles anymore. I think a lot of people would appreciate that going forwards. I've probably done about 70 of these by now, honest to God, it feels like that. And yeah, they do just get really boring because it's the same action, just matching colours on little dials or little knobs, despite whatever machinery it is, whether it's meant to be a microwave, a washing machine, or a big antenna dashboard. The map is littered with resource towers that you have to go and get components to craft, and there is a bit of a cost in crafting, which I quite like. So yeah, a bit of a grind going on to combine and make the best weapon you can. It's going to be really fun going through all these and really making even more stuff. Definitely feels like it's geared towards as well upgrading your items over time, which you can do specifically for like New Game Plus run-throughs. It's worth noting as well, I didn't find too much gating of certain abilities or items that you needed 100 in vitality to use. Yeah, a little bit, but not as much as I've seen in other games. And just a final note, if it grinds your gears, this kind of thing, that's some things you're going to need a high dark or light score in Aura before you can unlock some of the abilities to use. So it does try and encourage replayability or going through a different build or restarting over again. So in closing, because I've rambled on enough, Biomutant has got all the tropes that you expect from an open world game. That is a plus point for me because I've realised that so many of you guys really love this kind of stuff. It's got fantastic combat and it's got real variation in the enemies, the looks of them, and just the landscape in the world is pretty, it's beautiful. It's let down by a story that doesn't really reflect your journey, other than like some pretty arbitrary choices that you'll make. It doesn't really feel like the payoff is there, and definitely there is some elements of repetition that do creep in quite early, much maybe more than other open world games. There's a really great photo mode. I mean, it's kind of standard for some games now, although sometimes they don't implement this stuff for ages and ages. I've had loads of fun getting loads of crazy, cool little shots. And yeah, some of the contraptions you use, they are fun to roll around in. I just wish they'd gone even a bit more crazier in what you could do with some of them, like the mounts and maybe like the mechanical hand that you get. That's probably one of the best examples of what you could do with a bit more crazy. So overall, it's a game that's going to definitely give you something to do. It may get repetitive for some, but I could see this developing a cult following despite some of the big critics ravaging it, which I kind of have taken notice of a little bit, and I just don't agree wholeheartedly. I don't think this game is a 6. If I had to put a number on it, I would say it's a solid 7, 8 out of 10. Agree, disagree, let me know in the comment section, and I'll see you guys very soon.